One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the Seatown corner now, out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases rolled down towards the Two-Tongue Sea, like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged fish freezing waves, and I plunge my hands into the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays, resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out comes Mrs. Prothero and the firemen. It was on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden, waiting for Cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December in my memory is as white as Lapland, although there were no reindeers. But there were cats. Patient, cold and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible, whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slide and slide all over the white-backed garden walls. And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasin trappers from Hudson Bay off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, well, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden, or, if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbour's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house, and smoke indeed was pouring out to the dining room, and the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompey. Oh, this was better than all the cats in Wales, standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Oh, something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero. She beat the gong. "They won't be there," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." Well, there was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero was standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he said, and we threw all our snowballs into the smoke, and I think we missed Mr. Prothero, and then we ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance. Oh, and Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited, very quietly, to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales, and birds the colour of red flannel petticoats whisked past the heart-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlours, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed. But here a small boy says, "It snowed last year too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea." But that was not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewashed buckets down the sky. It came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely ivied the walls, and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white torn Christmas cards. Were there postmen in too? Oh, with sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses. On spread frozen feet they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was the ringing of bells. You mean the postman went rat-a-tat-tat, and the doors rang? No, I mean the bells the children could hear were inside them. I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells. Oh, there were church bells too. Inside them? Oh, no, 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 in the bat black snow-white belfries, tugged by bishops and storks, and they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and ice-cream hills, over the crackling sea. And it seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Get back to the postmen? Oh, they were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. And they knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Ours has got a black knocker. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents. Oh, and then the presents after the Christmas box. And the cold postman, with a rose on his button nose, tingled down the tea-tray-slithered run of the chilly, glinting hills, and he went in his ice-bound boots like a man on fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God he was gone. Get back to the presents? Oh, there were useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days and mittens made for giant sloths. Zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-war down to the galoshes, blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for the victims of head-shrinking tribes. And from aunts who always wore wool next to the skin, there were moustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crotcheted nose-bag from an aunt, now alas, no longer whinnying with us. And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond and did and drowned. And books that told me everything about the wasp, except why. Go on to the useless presents, old bags of moist and many-coloured jelly babies, and a folded flag and a false nose, and a tram conductor's cap, or a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell, and a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing mow that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which you could make the grass, the trees, the sea, and the animals any colour I pleased. And still the dazzling sky-blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boiled, toffee, fudge, and all sorts, crunchies, cracknels, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butter Welsh for the Welsh. Oh, and a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth and you stood at the corner of the street and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then, with a smirk, you ate it. And then it was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles like in our house? Oh, some few large men sat in the front parlours without their colours. Uncles, almost certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. And some few small aunts, not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edge of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break like faded cups and saucers. For dinner we had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned, and slept. I would go out, my bright new boots squeaking, into the white world, onto the seaward hill, to call on Jim and Dan and Jack, and to pad through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints on the hidden pavements. I remember that we went carol singing once, and there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? Oh no, Jack said. Go King Wenceslas, I'll count three. 1, 2, 3, we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness, from the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Go King Wenceslas looked out on a feast of Stephen, and then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. Always on Christmas night there was music. And then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window, out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses of our hill, and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.